The Nixri had ruled from the shadows for millennia. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. There were no fleets, no grand armadas, no visible empires. Instead, they infiltrated, manipulated, and controlled. Entire civilizations rose and fell at their whim, their histories rewritten without ever knowing the silent hand guiding their fate. The secret of their dominance lay in their biology. Unlike other species that relied on technology to conceal themselves, the Nixri possessed a natural ability to bend light around their bodies, rendering them effectively invisible. No reflective surfaces, no distortions, just perfect absence. Even sound barely betrayed them, as their bodies produced almost no noise, and their movements were calculated with inhuman precision. Their influence spread like a virus. A planetary ruler who suddenly grew paranoid? A government destabilized by internal strife? A war that erupted over a simple misunderstanding? The Nixri were always there, unseen, pulling the strings. To them, the galaxy was a game board, and they played it with unmatched mastery. But all great empires, even those hidden in the darkness, eventually overreach. The humans were an anomaly, an upstart species that expanded aggressively, colonizing worlds at an alarming rate. Unlike many other civilizations that had been quietly subdued before they could become threats, humanity had proven surprisingly resilient. Their wars were brutal, their adaptability uncanny, and their sheer willpower defied conventional logic. Yet, the Nixri were not concerned. They had encountered countless warlike species before and had brought each to its knees without ever being detected. Humanity would be no different. Their agents moved quickly. They embedded themselves in human institutions, slithered into their military networks, and infiltrated their fledgling interstellar colonies. The goal was simple: sow discord, spread confusion, and turn humanity against itself. If done correctly, humans would never even realize an external force was working against them. They would tear themselves apart, and when the dust settled, the Nixri would be the ones deciding the fate of their remains. At first, everything went according to plan. A series of political scandals erupted seemingly out of nowhere. Trust between human nations, already tenuous, began to erode. Military operations encountered inexplicable failures, ships lost contact, bases fell silent, command structures collapsed without warning. The Nixri smiled, though no one could see it. Yet something felt off. There were reports, scattered at first, then growing in number. Soldiers hesitating in empty hallways, claiming they felt something watching them. Engineers working alone insisting they heard footsteps behind them, only to find nothing. Security personnel reviewing surveillance footage, certain they had seen a flicker in the air, a momentary ripple where there should have been nothing. The Nixri dismissed these as anomalies. Every species had its paranoids, its ghost stories, its unexplained occurrences. But these reports didn't stop. They increased. And worse, the humans were starting to take them seriously. One Nixri operative stationed on a human warship noted a disturbing trend. Humans were changing their behavior. They moved differently, as if testing the air around them. They spoke in hushed tones about an unseen presence. The ship's security systems were altered in subtle ways, as if trying to detect something that shouldn't exist. And then came the strangest occurrence of all: the animals. Dogs, primarily. Humans had a peculiar affinity for these creatures, using them even in military environments despite their reliance on advanced technology. And yet, every single time a Nixri drew near, the creatures reacted violently. They growled, bared their teeth, barked at empty spaces with an aggression that could not be explained away as simple instinct. The operative made a decision that would prove fatal. He remained in place, studying the creatures, certain that they posed no real threat. After all, what could an inferior species pet possibly do to an entity they couldn't even see? Then the alarms went off. Not by accident, not by coincidence. The humans had finally put the pieces together. The reports of strange movements, the unexplained noises, the animals' reactions, it had all culminated in one singular conclusion: they were not alone. Something was there, something unseen. And if humans were good at one thing, it was finding the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The warship went into lockdown. Thermal imaging systems were activated, motion detectors recalibrated. Even the air circulation patterns were monitored for disturbances. The Nixery, for the first time in their long history, found themselves in unfamiliar territory. They were being hunted. The operative tried to escape, slipping through the ship's corridors, but the humans adapted faster than expected. They weren't just searching blindly, they were learning. The paths they blocked weren't random. The angles at which they fired weren't guesses. They were narrowing down his position, hurting him like prey. A single gunshot rang out in the silence. Not a blast of indiscriminate fire, not a desperate attempt to hit a target they couldn't see. It was precise. Calculated. The bullet ripped through his body, and in that moment, for the first time ever, a Nixery became visible. He barely had time to process what had happened before more shots followed. It was over in seconds. The humans stood there, weapons raised, staring at the body that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. There was no celebration, no victory cry. Just silent acknowledgement. They had suspected something was there. Now they had proof. And the Nixery had made a critical mistake. The moment the humans saw their enemy, they didn't hesitate. They didn't fall into fear. They didn't collapse under the weight of the unknown. They adapted. And that, more than anything else, was what made them the most dangerous species the Nixery had ever encountered. The humans weren't just another civilization to manipulate. They were the beginning of the end. The first confirmed kill of a Nixery operative sent shockwaves through their hidden network. It was an impossibility made real, a scenario they had never once considered. No species had ever seen them, much less struck them down. Yet the humans had done it with an almost unsettling efficiency. At first, the Nixery leaders dismissed the event as an isolated failure, a singular anomaly in an otherwise flawless history of domination. A mistake on the operative's part, nothing more. But then it happened again. And again. Whispers spread through human military channels, hushed conversations exchanged between officers. Reports surfaced of strange occurrences, unease settling into the ranks like a tangible force. Soldiers trusted their instincts, even when logic told them nothing was there. Entire ships implemented new security protocols based on nothing more than gut feelings and the accounts of those who swore they had seen something. The humans didn't understand what they were dealing with, but they knew something unnatural was moving among them. And unlike other species, they refused to ignore it. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: dogs. Humans had brought them along to war for centuries, but to the Nixery, they had always seemed like primitive, outdated relics of an earlier age. But the humans trusted their animals, sometimes even more than their own technology. And when the dogs reacted, the humans paid attention. That was when the Nixery realized they were in trouble. Dogs couldn't be fooled. They didn't need sight to know something was there. They could smell it, hear it, sense it in ways beyond human comprehension. What the human eye failed to perceive, a growl in the dark made undeniable. Entire facilities began implementing canine patrols, not as a replacement for sensors, but as an extension of their growing awareness that they were not alone. The Nixery scrambled for countermeasures. They adapted, moving slower, altering their pheromonal output, masking their scent. But it wasn't enough. The dogs would still notice. And worse, the humans took it a step further. They started studying the reactions, measuring body language, tracking where the animals looked, where they growled, where they refused to move forward. Patterns emerged. And from those patterns, the humans built the first crude system of detection. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even reliable at first. But it was a crack in the armor. The Nixery abandoned subtlety. They needed to understand the extent of the threat, so they sent in more operatives, testing different human environments. But every mission came back with the same problem: humans weren't ignoring their instincts. They were refining them. That was when the next failure occurred. A Nixery infiltrator, embedded deep within a human research facility, found himself trapped by an experiment he never saw coming. It wasn't an energy field or an advanced scanner. It was simply a room. A dark, empty room filled with nothing but infrared lights and high-speed cameras. He entered, unknowingly triggering the test. And in that moment, the humans saw him, not directly, not as a clear image, but as a shimmer, a distortion against the backdrop of perfect stillness. It was enough. Alarms blared, doors sealed shut, and the humans reacted with terrifying speed. Within moments, he was dead. Another corpse dragged into the light. Another confirmation that they were not invincible. The Nixery panicked. A single failure could be overlooked. Two could be rationalized. But this was proof that their time in the shadows was ending. They still had the advantage, for now. The humans couldn't see them with the naked eye. Their technology was crude, barely scratching the surface of what was necessary to counter Nixery infiltration. But the trajectory was clear. They weren't declining. They weren't growing complacent like so many species before them. They were accelerating. That was what made humanity different. Most civilizations, when faced with an unseen enemy, would falter. Fear would turn them inward, paranoia breaking their ranks before war even began. The Nixery had banked on this reaction, just as they had with countless species before. But humans? They weren't cowering. They weren't turning against themselves. They were hunting. The Nixery watched in real time as humans adapted on a level that defied all logic. Within weeks, standard patrol routes changed. Soldiers moved differently, keeping their backs to surfaces, ensuring no unseen force could stand behind them. Experimental imaging technology spread through the ranks like wildfire. The Nixery began to experience something entirely foreign to their kind. Fear. It crept into their movements, slowed their reactions, made them question the very foundation of their superiority. They had always been the watchers, the unseen observers, the architects of fate. But now, humans were watching back. And the worst part? The Nixery still didn't fully understand how. The humans weren't working off hard data alone. Some of their methods couldn't be explained through logic or science. Soldiers who shouldn't have been able to detect them were making kills with unsettling precision. It was as if the humans weren't just seeing with their eyes anymore. They were sensing them. The Nixery leadership convened in secrecy, desperate to find a solution. Their power relied entirely on their invisibility. If they lost that, they lost everything. Drastic action was needed. They would have to escalate. If the humans were going to hunt them, then the Nixery would make them regret it. The Nixery had never known desperation before. For countless generations, their supremacy had been absolute, their methods unchallenged. But now, the impossible was happening. Humanity had done more than detect them, they had begun countering them. The shadows that once concealed the Nixery so perfectly were no longer safe. They could not afford to wait. If humanity was adapting this quickly, it meant their window for maintaining control was rapidly closing. They devised a new strategy, an overwhelming infiltration campaign. Instead of small, precise strikes, they would flood human systems with operatives. The goal was twofold. First, to disrupt and sabotage human countermeasures before they could become widespread. Second, to locate the source of these advancements and eliminate it at any cost. The first wave struck hard. Military bases suffered sudden malfunctions. Power grids flickered at critical moments. Weapons misfired, ships veered off course, supply chains collapsed. It was a calculated strike meant to throw humanity into disarray, to shake their growing confidence before it could solidify. But something was wrong. The Nixery had assumed their attacks would remain undetected, that humanity would attribute these incidents to mechanical failures, human error, or sheer misfortune. Instead, they received an answer they never expected. The humans were waiting for them. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't just soldiers acting on instinct. Somewhere, somehow, humanity had anticipated this escalation. The malfunctions they had caused were reversed almost as soon as they happened. Patrols doubled in frequency, and security protocols adapted in real time. Every Nixery infiltrator that entered human-controlled space suddenly found themselves trapped in a carefully laid web. And then the disappearances began. At first, it was subtle. A single operative went dark, presumed compromised. Then another. Then 3 more in the span of a day. They left no traces, no signs of struggle, no final transmissions. It was as if the humans had turned their own tactics against them. Panic spread through the Nixery ranks. Their agents, once untouchable, now operated under a constant sense of dread. They moved slower, more cautiously, afraid to make even the slightest mistake. Their once flawless coordination began to break down. Then came the trap. A Nixery strike team, tasked with eliminating what they believed to be the research hub behind humanity's newfound abilities, infiltrated a secure military facility on the colony world of Arcadia 7. It should have been an easy operation. Their intel suggested minimal defenses, a skeleton crew of scientists, and a handful of armed personnel. They had no idea the entire base had been designed to lure them in. The moment the team crossed the perimeter, subtle sensors embedded in the walls activated, mapping their every step. Air circulation units, seemingly ordinary, were laced with microparticle detectors that registered their movement. A low-level electromagnetic field disrupted the Nixery's natural cloaking ability, not enough to make them fully visible but enough to create anomalies, shadows where there should have been none, distortions in the air that sharp-eyed soldiers could track. By the time they reached their objective, it was already too late. The humans had been waiting. Doors sealed, alarms triggered, and the lights cut out, not in an attempt to blind the intruders, but to render their cloaking completely useless. The Nixery had always relied on manipulating light to remain unseen, but in absolute darkness, their presence became painfully obvious. They weren't invisible anymore. They were silhouettes moving in a void. The soldiers didn't hesitate. Precision gunfire tore through the team in seconds, cutting down operatives that had never once faced direct combat. For the first time in their existence, they were the ones who couldn't see their enemy. They fought blindly, striking at shadows, firing at sounds they couldn't track. Only one made it out alive. Wounded and barely functioning, he sent a final transmission to his superiors before collapsing in the wastelands beyond the base. His last words were simple, but they carried a weight that sent shockwaves through the Nixery leadership. Asterisk. They can see us. Asterisk. Panic turned to full-scale crisis. Every Nixery operation was put on hold. Their networks went silent, their agents withdrew from human territories en masse. Their leaders needed time to process what had happened, to understand how a species they had once considered primitive had managed to counter what no other had before. But humanity wasn't about to give them time. Within days, human forces launched counter-strikes against suspected Nixery strongholds. They didn't waste resources attacking blindly, they knew exactly where to strike. Entire hidden bases were wiped out with surgical precision. The Nixery found themselves in a war they had never prepared for. And they were losing. The war had changed. What began as a silent conflict of manipulation and deception had erupted into something far more brutal. The Nixery, once the undisputed masters of unseen warfare, now found themselves on the defensive. Their secrecy had been their greatest weapon, but with humans adapting at an unprecedented rate, that advantage was slipping through their fingers. For the first time in their history, they were being hunted. The humans had wasted no time. Armed with the knowledge that their enemies were not invincible, they unleashed a relentless campaign across every front. Their soldiers moved with a newfound confidence, deploying experimental scanning technologies that turned the Nixery's own cloaking against them. Thermal optics, motion-sensitive fields, adaptive AI algorithms, each innovation was designed to track, predict, and eliminate the unseen threat. The Nixery attempted to counter these advancements, but they faced a fundamental problem: time. Humanity was moving too fast. Every defensive measure they devised was rendered obsolete within days. Every adaptation they made was anticipated and countered before it could be fully implemented. It was as if humans were evolving in real time, absorbing every encounter, every battle, and turning it into an opportunity to grow stronger. The turning point came when the humans introduced what would later be called the Veil Hunters. These elite units weren't just trained to fight an invisible enemy, they were designed for it. Every soldier was equipped with multiple layers of sensory enhancements, combining electromagnetic mapping, acoustic tracking, and even biological intuition. But their true weapon wasn't technology. It was instinct. The Nixari had underestimated the human mind. While most species relied entirely on their physical senses, humans had something else, a natural ability to perceive what they shouldn't. Call it intuition, call it pattern recognition, call it sheer predatory awareness, but it gave them an uncanny ability to predict movements, anticipate ambushes, and react to things they couldn't fully see. The first deployment of the Veil Hunters was a massacre. A hidden Nixari stronghold, once thought impenetrable, was breached with terrifying precision. The human strike team moved with eerie efficiency, tracking their prey with senses that shouldn't have been possible. They fired where no Nixari should have been visible, yet their shots hit every target. They dodged attacks they shouldn't have known were coming. They didn't just see the Nixari, they felt them. Panic spread like wildfire. The Nixari were not built for direct confrontation. Their entire society had been structured around remaining undetected, manipulating events from a distance. Without that advantage, they were nothing more than shadows exposed under a burning light. Retreat became the only viable option. Entire networks collapsed as the Nixari withdrew from human space, abandoning their carefully constructed infiltrations. Colonies that had once been quietly controlled were left leaderless. Military outposts that had been subtly sabotaged were suddenly free of interference. The humans pressed the attack, not allowing a single moment of respite. Every retreating Nixari force was hunted down before they could regroup. Every fallback position was preemptively destroyed. What had started as a battle for survival had turned into extermination. Desperation took hold. The Nixari leadership, for the first time in recorded history, convened in the open. There was no choice, secrecy had failed them. They needed a solution, and they needed it now. A radical idea emerged. If humans had become impossible to control from the shadows, then perhaps it was time to step into the light. A direct confrontation was unthinkable, but what if they could turn humanity's greatest strength against them? Their adaptability. The Nixari were losing because humans were evolving too quickly, absorbing knowledge and experience at a rate no other species could match. But what if that same trait could be exploited? What if they could introduce something too dangerous for humans to adapt to? Something that would burn through their aggressive evolution before they could overcome it? It was a gamble, but they had no other options. And so, for the first time, the Nixari prepared for open war. The Nixari had never waged a war in the open. They had never needed to. Their power had always come from the shadows, from the quiet manipulation of events, from the certainty that no enemy could strike what they could not see. That certainty was gone. Humanity had forced their hand. The last remnants of Nixari forces, scattered and desperate, abandoned secrecy entirely. Their new strategy was brutal and direct. If they could no longer control humanity, they would break them. They unleashed waves of biological and psychological warfare, not with the intent to conquer, but to overwhelm. Their operatives no longer sought to infiltrate, they sought to destroy. Entire cities were targeted with hallucinogenic neurotoxins, designed to blur the line between reality and illusion. Human soldiers began to see enemies that weren't there, hearing whispers in the dark, firing at phantoms. Electronic warfare disrupted communication networks, spreading disinformation so thoroughly that even humanity's greatest tacticians struggled to determine what was real. And yet none of it worked as intended. The Nixari had assumed humans would crumble under such psychological pressure. Any other species would have. But humans did what they always did, they adapted. The chaos and deception that should have shattered their ranks only strengthened them. Soldiers learned to recognize the false signals, to ground themselves in discipline and instinct. Commanders decentralized their operations, ensuring no single attack could dismantle their war effort. Then, humanity responded. The humans had studied the Nixari's tactics well. They understood their methods, their weaknesses, the gaps in their technology. And now, they turned those same strategies against them. Infiltration teams struck at the heart of Nixari command structures, bypassing their defenses with an unsettling ease. Their cloaking fields, once the pinnacle of stealth, were rendered useless by human countermeasures. Worse still, the humans didn't just attack military targets. They went after the very foundation of Nixari's civilization. Their information networks were compromised, their supply chains severed, their infrastructure dismantled piece by piece. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were erasing the Nixery's ability to wage one. Desperation turned to collapse. Nixery-controlled worlds fell one by one, not through bombardment or invasion, but through precise, methodical strikes that left them defenseless. Entire fleets were abandoned as command structures disintegrated. Their operatives, once feared and unstoppable, were either dead or in hiding. And then, the final blow came. The humans launched an offensive deep into Nixery space, not with overwhelming force, but with terrifying precision. They knew exactly where to strike, dismantling what remained of their enemy's power in a campaign that was as efficient as it was ruthless. The Nixery leadership, once untouchable, was cornered. They had no choice but to surrender. For the first time, the galaxy saw what lay beneath the Nixery's illusion of strength, an empire built on the assumption of invincibility, now shattered by a species that refused to be controlled. Humanity had not just won. They had proven, once and for all, that nothing could remain hidden from them forever.